we're at about 40 cents of growth for every dollar of debt we take on, which means we're basically digging ourselves deeper in the hole. No amount of debt or printing that you do is enough, and all you're doing is digging yourself so deep that hyperinflation is there, and then you have to reset the currency. Probably by the time we get to that point where the dollar has to be reset against something, most likely it'll be Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin sort of takes over this global unit of account in less than 50 years. We're on the precipice of a new renaissance. A lot of Bitcoiners are hodlers now. They're holding, right? They're saving their wealth there, but they think that they can just go disappear on a hill. I'm going to hold my, whatever it is, 6.15 Bitcoin, and I'm going to emerge out of my cave in 50 years from now, and the whole world's going to be better. But it's not going to be better unless people actually do the work. What I say at conferences when I speak is like, hey, you guys are the hardcore Bitcoiners, right? You guys are the Bitcoin maximalists. Yeah, cool. So if you're not going to do it, then who is? We have Bitcoin, we have AI, we have decentralization overall, robotics, and all of that coming together is going to create this massive wave of flourishment. I'm extremely bullish for the future. And I think asset prices, specifically in that niche, are going to see prices that most people just can't even put their head around. It's an enormous opportunity that will only come really once in our lifetime.
Mark Moss is a well-known American entrepreneur and investor. Amongst many things, he runs the Mark Moss Show on iHeartRadio, dedicated to Bitcoin and related macroeconomic topics. He has built an impressive following on YouTube, where he educates viewers on wealth and personal freedom. Moss is involved in various investment ventures, including the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, and he also co-authored the Uncommunist Manifesto.
So there's no way out of the debt situation. And whether it was Trump or Kamala, I mean, the debt situation was not going to be solved. There's just really no way to bring the government back to a budget without crashing everything. You just can't do that.
Mr. Mark Moss, thank you so much for joining me here today and being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. I also want to thank you for being in our Bitcoin trading cards. Also, by the way, helping to orange pill the masses, Trojan horsing the masses through education and extremely valuable cards. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, appreciate that. Nice intro. And yeah, good to see you again. I'm excited to dig into these topics.
Yes. Same. So we were talking offline a little bit. Obviously, the big story of the day, we hear a day or 2 days after the election, Trump, markets are going crazy, booming, Bitcoin all-time highs as we speak, probably hitting another high as we speak here. So I would love your thoughts and kind of what you see. I feel like it's a culmination of a lot of the things you've been talking about recently on your shows, and kind of, the melt up and the things that are coming. I would love for you to kind of give the viewer, the average person looking for some direction on what we can kind of expect, I guess, over the next, 6, 12, 24 months.
One thing I was thinking about in regards to the election and sort of where we're at right now is, in 2021, I started giving a bunch of talks about cycles. Cycles are something that I've always paid a lot of attention to. I love history. I use history a lot in a lot of my posts and videos and things like that, because history is so important for us to understand cause and effect. When this happens, this happens. Now, Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So, if I touched a hot stove, I burn myself. I might have burned my hand this time. Maybe next time I burn my arm. So it sort of rhymes, but I know the cause and effect, that if I do this, touch a hot stove, then this, I burn my arm. And so history shows us these things. And cycles also show us how things repeat. And the reason why cycles work is sort of because of human nature. And human nature tends to take things too far, and we overcorrect. And then we go too far the other way, and then we overcorrect, and we sort of bounce back and forth. And so one thing I started talking about a lot about, I think it was I did a bunch of keynotes at conferences talking about cycles. I did Peter McCormick's show, What Bitcoin Did, and we framed it up. It was the battle for the fate of humanity. And I was talking about all these different cycles, and one of which is you have political cycles, you have financial cycles, you have technology cycles, and they all operate on different time frames. One is about every 84 years. So most people, I'm sure, are familiar with like the fourth turning. So the fourth turning is a cycle. So it's an 80-year cycle. It's really like an 84-year cycle. And that's sort of like what we call like a generational theory. The hard times, strong men, good times, good times, weak men, bad times. And it's that generational cycle. But really what we have is like every 84 years, we have these regime changes where everything changes. So 84 years ago was end of World War II. That was, FDR, all these things happened. 84 years before that, Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. And when you look at cycles, and if you understand like technical analysis, you understand like the third time we get there is like the big one, like a triple top, triple bottom. And so 84 times 3 is 252. So we have this big 250-year political revolution cycle. And I talk about how it's this pendulum sort of swings back and forth because we take things too far, go the other way. And I talked about how we had been going from a decentralized cycle to a centralization cycle, and it was going to swing back to decentralization. And in 2021, so many people are like, "Oh, Mark, that's just ridiculous. Like we're in peak. Look where we're going. The WEF is taking over the world. The WHO is taking over the world. We're going. How can you say we're swinging back to decentralization?" And I said, "Look, there's all these signs right here, but it's kind of hard to see when you're in it, the forest for the trees, so to speak." Now here we are in 2024. Trump just went in another presidency. And I think you can see this right now. You see this. So you can see China and Russia, they're out doing their own thing. The BRICS, they're gone. They're off doing their own thing. And even in the United States, so back to the WEF, World Economic Forum, the leader, Klaus Schwab, everybody's favorite Bond villain. I mean, he's pretty much non-existent. You haven't seen or heard from him. I don't know if it was 8 months ago, he got allegations of sexual misconduct or whatever it was, and he's now gone. Where's the WEF? The number 2 henchman, Yuval Harari, was making the rounds. You saw videos going around. I think it was Lexbert Friedman he was talking to, or somebody, I may have that wrong, but of him saying that if Donald Trump wins, it's an end of globalism. Well, guess who won? Donald Trump. And so back to what I've been talking about for 4 years now, we're seeing this end of globalism and this swing back to decentralization. So I think that's really important to understand. And then, like I said, I think this election cycle really proves that, because it wasn't just Trump winning. It was a complete smackdown, a complete rejection of all of the globalist ideas and agendas. That's what lost. And not just lost barely, but lost to a complete smackdown. And so I think you see the world changing. And the reason why it's important to understand that is that we all have to have like this lens or this frame that we view the world through. And then once we have that frame or that lens, then we can start to project out, what's going to happen next. So I know you wanted to start talking about like this melt up and maybe what happens with inflation and asset prices and things like that. But you sort of have to have this frame and this lens first to even understand that, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And those, again, we'll link to some of these too, so people can see some of these videos you've just done recently, because they are great explaining this as well and going into further detail. So this repudiation of the global cabal, again, you've mapped this out too over the last 5 years as well. And, literally charts of mapping these things out and what, how things connect, which is so important. Like you said, the context for people. Is there a repudiation? And in saying this, so watching some of these other videos that people should go watch of yours as well, you talk about the melt up, you talk about people not really giving a shit about the dead anymore. I mean, like, we're in this world where you can't really go back to the way. Is there a repudiation though at some point, just like the global cabal, the Klaus Schwabs? When is there a repudiation of the money? Because it still seems like a lot of this, like you said, the real estate guys, people just aren't getting, even Bitcoiners aren't getting how the system works. At what point do people realize like, oh, we can't just keep doing this forever? And what might change that? Is it black swans, or what do you think when you think of this repudiation?
I think of the law of diminishing returns. So sort of back to people take things too far. It's just human nature. And so I think right now when you talk about sort of the money, right, and the money failing, we're 53 years into this fiat monetary experiment. At what point, I think the point that you're asking is there at a point where somebody says, wait a minute, this is wrong, let's switch? And to that, I would say the answer is no. So we have the law of diminishing returns. And that means that what happens is a little bit is good, more isn't better, and eventually more becomes bad and starts to be damaging, and eventually more doesn't work anymore. And so I don't think there's no historical precedent for that ever to be the case where they just decide to switch. So for example, we can look at every modern case right now: Peru, Venezuela, Argentina, Lebanon, any of these, Turkey. Never have we seen a government say, well, boys, pack it up. It was a good run while it lasted. Shut down the money printer. Like, they're just going to keep printing until it just doesn't work anymore. There's nothing in history that shows that either. We can look back in the 80s at Zimbabwe. They're still trying it again. We can go back to Weimar Republic. And so they're always going to print until it doesn't work anymore. But the law of diminishing returns, and based off of the Keynesian sort of economic system that we have, or this debt-based monetary system, is that the goal is that they're basically using debt to to bring value from the future to get growth. And so the goal of a Keynesian economics would be this Keynesian multiplier of where they could bring on 50 cents worth of debt to get $1 worth of growth. But the problem is eventually you get less growth than you're bringing on debt. And that's where we're at today. So right now we're at about 40 cents of growth for every dollar of debt we take on, which means we're basically digging ourselves deeper in the hole. And at what point will there be this point where we say, hey, let's just stop? There won't be. When it doesn't work anymore. That's when it will be there, when it doesn't work anymore. So eventually you get to a Zimbabwe where no amount of debt or printing that you do is enough. And all you're doing is digging yourself so deep that hyperinflation is there. And then you have to reset the currency. Now, what's interesting about resetting the currency, and again, we have dozens and dozens of cases where we can see this, it has to be reset to something of value. It has to be anchored to something. So with Zimbabwe, for example, it's anchored to the dollar. So it was 1-to-1 with the dollar, then it was 500-to-1 to a dollar, then it was a quadrillion to 1 to the dollar, and then they reset it, and let's start at 80-to-1 this time, and then it goes up, and let's set it at 500-to-1 this time. Now the last attempt was to set it to gold. And so there has to be a reset to something. And what happens when the dollar is not there to reset against? What happens when it's the dollar itself? What has to be reset against something? And the answer is, what will be reset against? A lot of people right now thinking that's gold, which if it was done today, that would probably be the most likely case because gold has 5,000 years of history and central banks are still buying it, et cetera. But probably by the time we get to that point where the dollar has to be reset against something, most likely it'll be Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin sort of takes over this global unit of account in less than 50 years, based off of history and cycle, understanding technology, adoption curves. I think in about 50 years, it'll probably be this unit of account. And if we get to that point, at some point, which is probably going to be decades in front of us, the dollar would have to be reset to something. And then we might be looking at that. But I don't think it's coming anytime soon.
So in saying that, we were talking about this offline a little bit too. We were talking about Bitcoiners. It feels like, again, we get not echo chamber. I mean, you get an echo chamber. We're human, so we all have biases. We get in our echo chambers, but it feels like everyone sees this, right? Like we go to conferences, you do whatever, and it's like everyone sees this. This is obvious. Then you kind of like you leave that, and you're like, oh well, no one really realizes this. So is it Bitcoiners just kind of need to just relax and realize this is going to take a little while, to your point of by 2030, 2040, 2050, and in saying that, what are things we can do? We talked about, retiring off Bitcoin. And there's, can you lend against your Bitcoin? A lot of Bitcoiners even not understanding, hey, why are we truly buying Bitcoin in this system change, this step change? In the meantime, again, this might take a little while. How do you deploy that capital for good ventures or other good assets to provide more cash flow? I'd love for you to kind of go into that a little bit and your thinking there, because again, I think it's something that just doesn't get talked about enough. The Bitcoin community, it's of course like you hodl and just the average person can hodl, but how do we kind of take things to the next level and start, forcing that step change in a way? How are we using those assets productively to build the world we want to be in?
Well, I don't know what people are so anxious about or think is taking too long. Like, force what change? Like, force what? Like, what outcome are they looking for? Like, what do they want to happen? I mean, Bitcoin's up, whatever, 1,000,000%, right? Like, I mean, what is it that they want? Like, what change are they trying to bring? Now, I'd love it if we went back to a sound money standard. That'd be great. So I guess I'd love to see that happen. I think it'd be really good for society to be on a sound money standard. However, if we switch to a hard money standard tomorrow, it would be catastrophic. It'd be catastrophic. So we can't just switch to that. So like, what are they trying to achieve, right? I think at the end of the day, I try to remind people, which sounds very controversial, is that we don't want money. Nobody wants money. What we want is the goods and services that money buys us. Money is a medium of exchange. It's a storehold of wealth, store of energy, and it's a medium of exchange, allows us to get the things that we want, the true wealth, the goods and services, and it sets a unit of account, so it puts a number or a way to measure that wealth and that value. And so ultimately, whether it's dollars or euros or yens or gold or chickens or Bitcoin, what difference does it make? What I want is goods and services. What I want is the quality of my life to improve. And so I need my money to buy me more goods and services in the future than less. And of course, Bitcoin is a way to preserve that purchasing power, because with fiat currency, it fails. So most of us, and it was a broad question, I'm not sure how to classify this, but for those people who are like ready ready to see this change brought in, good, then move to Bitcoin. Use Bitcoin as your unit of account right now. Most of the world are seeing prices getting so expensive that they're being priced out of houses. They're being priced out of cars. The quality of their life is going down. They can't afford the same amount of goods and services they used before, but that's only if you're pricing things in dollars. If you're pricing things in Bitcoin, it's a completely different world for you. One of my favorite macro analysts, Luke Grauman, had tweeted yesterday how he has sons, and that they would probably never be able to afford a house. And he said, but his oldest son has been taking all of his money that he's made through high school, paper routes, all the things, and put it into Bitcoin. And now with Bitcoin where it's at today, he has enough US dollar valuation where he could go buy a house. So because his son has been saving in Bitcoin as his unit of account, homes have gotten cheaper for his son to the point where he can afford one today. Had his son been on a dollar standard saving in dollars, he would never be able to afford the house. And so the point is this world that people want to have ushered in, like you could just switch to that world right now. And I think this is a key piece. Earlier today, I was sort of going back and forth with Whitney Webb on Twitter of a couple things. And she said, but Mark, all change comes from the bottom up, decentralization, which of course I agree. So you and I can just go usher in that world right now. We can move ourselves to a Bitcoin standard and achieve that. I do, again, want for society, I believe it would be beneficial to be on a fixed money standard, but I understand that's going to take a long period of time. Back to sort of the other part of the question that you asked is then if we really want to see that world brought in, then what are we actively doing for that? And I think that's kind of where you talked about like the hodling piece, where a lot of Bitcoiners are hodlers now. They're holding, right? They're saving their wealth there, but they think that they can just go disappear on a hill. I'm going to hold my, whatever it is, 6.15 Bitcoin, and I'm going to emerge out of my cave in 50 years from now, and the whole world's going to be better. But it's not going to be better unless people actually do the work. Because what you're doing is you may emerge and maybe have more purchasing power, but how is the world going to be any better if no one's actually doing anything to improve the world? And what I say at conferences when I speak is like, hey, you guys are the hardcore Bitcoiners, right? You guys are the Bitcoin maximalists. Yeah, cool. So if you're not going to do it, then who is? Like you're going to expect BlackRock to go build that world for you? And so, one of the hashtag sayings that I've been trying to use and kind of get to go a little viral is build or be built. And that's we either build the world that we want or someone else will build it for us, and we're just not going to be happy with that. I'm probably not going to be happy in a world that Mark Cuban designed for me. I'm probably not going to be happy in a world that Obama designed for me. I'm not going to be happy in a world that Larry Fink designed for me. But if I do nothing, that's what I get. And so as Bitcoiners, we should be actively building the world that we want. And we have a perfect example of this right now, Brandon. Think about what just happened with the election. There's so many moving pieces. I don't want to say the most important, but arguably one of the single most important data points is Twitter. If it wasn't for Twitter and free speech, I don't think we would be here today with the blow to globalism and Trump in office. And by having one outlet that allowed us to have this open communication, it moved the Overton window in a couple of ways. Number one, it changed the entire discourse and communication that we have. Number two, even look at the change that Mark Zuckerberg has gone through with Facebook because of what Twitter is doing, right? And there was a lot of shenanigans going down on election day, and a lot of them might have been able to get away with, except for Twitter was there and people were on the ground putting up photos and videos in real time. And even if, and I don't want to get into this, conspiratorial talk, but even if, let's just say hypothetically, a judge was corrupt and said, hey, yeah, let them play those shenanigans, they didn't have the chance because it was live on social for everyone to see. In 2020, they couldn't do that. Now, the reason why I talk about that is because an entrepreneur, arguably maybe the best entrepreneur of our time, Elon Musk, took some of his money, what is it? I don't know, $46 billion or whatever, and bought Twitter. And it's now worth, they say it's worth $18 billion. So he's lost tens of billions of dollars buying this. But he put his money at risk, potentially losing some of his money as a revolutionary in order to build the world that he wanted, in order to bring that. He said that he thinks that free speech is one of the most important aspects of our life. And he put his money where his mouth is and potentially pulled the country out of the clutches of the communists, at least for another 4 years. And so I think that's a perfect example for us. It's the entrepreneurs, it's the builders, the doers that drive the world forward, not the parasitic political class. But if we as entrepreneurs and if we as Bitcoiners and true believers are not going to actively do that and sacrificing some of our money, sacrificing some of our time, our effort, our energy, our focus, whatever it is, then we're going to get what we get. We're going to have a world built by Bill Gates and Larry Fink and whoever and Mark Cuban, and we're going to be happy with that.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. It makes me think of the Declaration of Independence, pledging our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And I think that that's something that's just been lost really on society the last 100+ years. And we're starting to, like you touched on, you always touch on the cycles and you touched on them earlier. I mean, we're in that cycle coming back to like, oh yeah, we actually need these principles. Like we actually need this in our life. So it's wild. But do you think the legacy media, so, the big thing is, legacy media is dead. Legacy media is dead because of this. Do you think, Joe Rogan is the debate stage in 4 years from now? Like how do you see this shift, this evolution, I guess, over the coming years here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things there. So
if you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff. And I get you have these guests on and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great and how Bitcoin is going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly? Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable Characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable Characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
Right off the bat, like if we start from a super high level, as a content creator, right, as somebody who's on all the social media platforms and YouTube, et cetera, I can already see this massive shift happening, and it continues to shift. It's been shifting and continuing. And really what we're starting to see right now today more than ever, and AI sort of helped escalate this, is that there's really this movement to go back to like raw, behind the scenes footage, and a lot of the overly polished, overly edited stuff is not doing as good. And it's because people are looking for authenticity and realness, and they don't want that overly polished fake image anymore. And so that's just across social media as a whole. But then when you extend that out, so that's sort of like what Whitney Webb says, from the bottom up. But as you extend that up, so not top down, but up, then that goes to like a Joe Rogan, right? So Joe Rogan sits down for 3-hour interviews, and just like, let's just riff, man. Let's just wrap it out. Let's just talk. The one interview I watched him doing with JD Vance, he was having like all these technical issues, like his mic stopped working. He kept bumping it. He climbed under the desk, and I was like, why didn't they edit this out? Like, why did they show that? But that's how raw that is, right? And really what we saw was, yes, a changing of the media, but again, it's driven by the way that we consume or desire to consume the media. But really what I see, and again, being a content creator is, and someone who sells in the digital market space, we've seen sort of almost the death of paid ads. And now if you don't create organic content, like your brand, your product, your course, it's never going to make it. Paid ads now are primarily being used as like a little bit of extra fire for the organic content. But really what you're doing is you're taking the best people are taking the organic content that works and just putting a little bit of money behind it to boost it, if you will. But paid ads are just not doing like they used to. And really what we saw that on a global stage, right? So the Kamala campaign spent $1 billion, and they had to pay for their advertising, right? So they had to pay for their celebrity endorsements. They had to pay for all their TV ads and online ads, because Kamala couldn't go create any organic content. She refused to go on shows. She did one interview, I believe. It was on whatever that talk show was, or that podcast. But she wouldn't go on shows. She did a couple CNN, whatever, but then they had to edit it way down, right? So an hour interview, they got 18 minutes out of it. And so all that was paid. Whereas the Trump campaign was all organic. Trump was just doing campaigns all day. He'd go on any show that wanted him. He went on 3-hour shows, right? And I think that was really the difference of the organic versus the paid. It shows the difference in content creation. It shows the difference in, like I said, authenticity and truth, if you will. I don't know if truth is the right word, but at least authenticity. And I think that's a big cultural shift. And sort of to answer the question, to summarize it, I think we have seen alternative news sites like what we're doing here, like obviously Joe Rogan, Tucker Carlson, Russell Brand, et cetera. We've been seeing that gaining And really, it seemed like it had overtaken mainstream, or what we call now legacy media, even in 2020. But I think this was probably the defining moment where no matter how much money they spent on legacy media, they could not overcome what the organic content did.
It's funny, and it's again, you are so good with educating people on the waves, demographics, things of that nature. And I always, for years, I've thought of the hippie bubble being the generation that obviously they're in the halls of power, and they've been in the halls of power for a long time, whether it's academia or politicians or media, Hollywood, whatever it is. And you're seeing, like you said, you're kind of seeing this defining moment where, with social media, it's people knowing how to use it now in a way where there's transparency, like you say, kind of truth, but like transparency, authenticity. And the younger generations, whether they're actually in power or they're the ones using it to show what's going on, we've never had that before. And going back to these cycles where for thousands of years, you didn't know what the hell the king was doing. Like, he just did something in the tower over there, and you were just whatever he did, I'm at the mercy of it. And now it's just completely opposite. So I feel like that shift, I mean, people have to feel it, and there's just no way you can't. So in saying all of this, we kind of touched on it a minute ago, and touch on that if you want, but the bottom up, the bottom up thing is like, I believe that too, but at the same time, you have this convert the king mentality. You can see it a lot in Bitcoin, obviously, like, hey, we're going to go get BlackRock, we're going to go get sovereign wealth funds. How do you kind of delineate what's important in a way for adoption, whether it's a Bitcoin or I guess anything you're trying to get society? It could be election or whatever. That is it, the bottom up, or I guess it's both in a way, but converting the king, converting these big pools of money, or is, because people still, obviously, they look at leaders, they look at, whatever it is, huge wealth leaders or politicians. And humans always do that. We can see it in the Bible, right? With King David, we want a king. And, so how do you kind of delineate where to kind of put your attention in a way, educating the masses, or is it converting the king? Like, how do you delineate that?
I did a podcast with Breedlove at Bitcoin Miami in 2023, I guess, and it was titled "The Crisis in the Confidence of Authority." And I sort of got this idea from this book titled "Revolt of the Public" by was it Martin Burry or whatever, but Revolt of the Public, great book. And basically it talks about sort of what we might know, Bitcoiners and economics. The problem with Keynesian economics is they don't have the information. So there's an information problem. They don't have the information to manage a market. And so we need a free market and let the price help manage that, right? And the same is sort of true in this information gap. And so what happened is, in the past, we had a different problem than we have today. In the past, the problem was, how do we get the information? Today, we have a different problem. Now we have too much information. How do we discern it? But the past was always about putting those people in places of power for us to get the information from. So a doctor wearing a smock, for example, then we would place authority. Hey, he's been trained. He went to university. He probably knows more about health than I do. You're on TV. You're Walter Cronkite. Okay, you're probably more plugged in. You know more about the news than I do. And so we would give these people this authority based off these positions. But the problem is that things change. As I talk about all the time, the answers have changed. And so today, again, we don't have an information problem. We have too much information. And now we are in sort of that Keynesian economic information gap problem, where now today, whoever those people are, the doctor, the newscaster, et cetera, they don't have enough information compared to the crowd. And so it's technology, it's Twitter that's given us that, right? And now with AI and the internet and things like that. And so, for example, my local doctor, my practitioner, my general health practitioner, for example, like, he doesn't have the information. Sure, he went to college 20 years ago and read a handful of books or whatever, and he's super smart, not to take anything away from him. But if I have some sort of a condition, I can feel it in my body. I know it's there. I have a vested interest. I care about my own health. And with the power that I have on the internet and AI and whatnot, I could probably know more about my specific situation in a few hours than he will, because he just hasn't studied it. There's the information gap. And the same is true with the newscasters. They're like, oh, no, there's nothing going on over there. And people are like in real-time video and like, what are you talking about? There's riots or whatever, right? And so really what we have now is this crisis of confidence and authority, where those kings, as you called them, no, they're gone. And now we're able to, free technology has changed that, where we're able to quickly and instantly and freely share ideas and information, and we have the power of the crowd. And all the time, as a content creator, I have to be very careful of this, where I see somebody say something on Twitter or whatever, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so good. I never thought about that. That's amazing. Maybe I want to share it. But then I'm like, I read through the comments, And then when you go through the comments, you're like, "Oh, I didn't think about that. Oh, that's it. Oh," and then it changes your mind. And so it's that crowd mind, right? And I think that's just extremely powerful. Now, to the part of the question that you asked is like, how do we navigate in that world? And now it takes a completely different skill. And of course, our school system hasn't equipped us for that. And so now the skill is the skill of discernment, critical thinking, like. And so how do we do that? Well, one, you need to have a base understanding of sort of a broad range of subjects. You need to be able to practice critical thinking, breaking things down into like a first principles level so I can start to formulate my own ideas off of that. When I receive information, like number one, who's giving me the information? Number two, what biases might this person have? Number three, how do I separate the fact versus opinion? Right. And as you start to think through that, and then you have to start thinking through second, third, fourth order effects, right? So like, I feel really bad for the poor people. Like, why don't we just give them a handout so they can get education and do that? Why don't we forgive their college debt? Because I mean, if we forgive the debt, then they can go work and maybe the economy gets better. But then what? Well, let's see, we put $1 trillion of debt into the economy. Then what? Well, then we have more inflation. Then what? Well, then those people aren't motivated to work. And then what? Right? So when you think about these things through different mental models, you start to see a difference. And that's unfortunately the skill that has to be learned, which then brings up a big problem with the voting base that we have today in a democracy. But that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, it makes me think of, and I would love to, going on a tangent here a little bit, get your thoughts on what you're doing with your kids. You know, I have 4 little kids. I think I don't know if we touched on this at all in Nashville a couple months ago, but you know, schools are so behind. You just made me think of this, and that's why I want to kind of tangent a little bit. But schools are so behind, critical thinking, all these things. Kids just kind of sitting there in government-run schools for 8 hours a day doing who knows what, you know, generally filling your head with a bunch of stuff you're never going to use in your life. And we have this information gap in the sense of we have the technology where you don't need to necessarily know these things when it gets to more advanced levels or whatever. So what are you doing to keep your kids up to date? You know, what do you have them, you know, working on, like whether it's time management, you know, things of that nature, critical thinking, discerning things. I think such important basic things that just get brushed to the side in modern culture.
Yeah, you know, that's a very broad question, and you're absolutely right, though, on the problem, and the problem is massive, and how do we do that? I think, number one, pull your kids out of school. You know, and the reason why I say that just as sort of like a matter-of-fact statement is because, again, the answer's changed, right? And so when you think about the world and how the world's changed, we used to live in like an analytical world, a technical world, if you will. And I mean, it was 100, 500 years ago where they used to think that we had 2 sides of our brain, analytical and creative. And they used to think we don't even need the creative side of our brain. They even did like lobotomies on that. It was crazy. And so our entire school system, the SAT system is all built for like analytical, technical thinkers. And so being the coder, the attorney, the doctor, things like that. There's not, and the school system doesn't support creative thought. And it's no wonder. I mean, it was designed in the late 1800s in Prussia to specifically train good factory workers to not think outside the box. It was specifically designed so you wouldn't do that. But the problem is, again, the answer's changed. And so today, now we're in the information age, and the internet has commoditized technical workers. So when I was younger, my mom wanted me to be an engineer or a coder. Those were like good jobs to have. But you know, most of the listeners know that economics is built off of scarcity, supply and demand. And so when a coder or an engineer or whatever were in scarcity, then they commanded a higher salary. But the internet commoditized technical workers. So now we have millions, hundreds of millions of coders and engineers and developers in Pakistan and in India and in the Philippines and all over the world. And so now I'm able to go hire engineers or coders for $5 an hour, $10 an hour by the dozen anywhere in the world, right? And so really what it takes to be successful today is it's a different world. And what it takes to be successful today is creativity. Creativity. I have to be able to see a problem, come up with a creative solution for the problem, and understand who the technical workers are that I need to bring together to now solve that problem. And so really the skill today is different. The skill today is like, how can I be a conductor of an orchestra? How can I get all the different people to play all the different instruments together to make that beautiful music? And back to the school system is specifically designed to remove the creativity. specifically designed for that. And so that's just rule number one. So homeschool, I mean, is obviously massively on the rise for any number of reasons. Number one. Number two, there are schools designed to even increase creativity. So there's a school, I forget what it's called now. Elon Musk designed it. I had my daughter go to it for a while, just
synthesis.
online.
Yeah,
synthesis. Exactly. So I had my daughter go to that for a while, and they would do these games online, and they would say, hey, we're going to play a game, but we're not going to tell you what it is. You have to figure it out. And they would do all these types of things. I think peeling back the curtain and showing them how the world works, I think is important, like how the sausage is made, so to speak. So bringing them into the world and showing them what business looks like and what I'm doing in business and how we're making money and how we're managing it so they can start to understand that real world, I think is important. With my older daughter, I would pay her, I would bribe her, I would pay her to read a bunch of books that she didn't want to read on economics, on history, on things that she wouldn't want to pick up on her own, but I would just pay her to do that. If they're older, like Hillsdale College is amazing. So Hillsdale College has amazing virtual classes on all types of history and constitution and government. And I would pay her to go through all those classes and watch all that stuff. Take them to events and conferences to see that. So those are all ideas. It depends on the age group, obviously, where they're at. There's a lot of really good books for people of all different ages for that. But I think, we have to understand, Ronald Reagan says that freedom wasn't passed to us in the bloodline. Instead, it must be fought for by every single generation. And so it's up to us to train that next generation properly.
Yeah. Boy, well said. And for the record, my kids are homeschooled, fortunately. So yes, the John Taylor Gatto books are unbelievable too. I don't know if you've read those. I don't know but those are awesome books.
I don't think I have.
He's got like 3 or 4 books, like Weapons of Mass Instruction, dumbing us down. It's all about, it was a New York City public school teacher in the 70s, 80s, 90s. He wrote the book in the early 90s. And then like towards the end of his career, he won a couple of State of the Year, Teacher of the Year, whatever. And he would get up to accept the award, and he would just trash the public school system in his acceptance speech. And they started going like viral, like in the early 90s. And he just turned them into books basically. And he's got like a handful of books now, but he's a huge in the homeschool crowd. I still met a lot of homeschoolers that don't even know him or the books, but John Taylor Gatto, awesome books. And I've learned some stuff in there. I was like, man, every Bitcoiner needs to know this. Everyone needs to know it, but there was things in there that you don't even see in the Bitcoin world. So, really cool education and history of like some of the things you just mentioned that people might not know, whether it was General Board of Education 100 years ago, 120 years ago, Prussia, stuff like that. So anyway, awesome stuff for people to check out. In that vein, what, Bitcoin is, the money is time, Bitcoin is time, as Bitcoiners know, and that's again, a world that a lot of people don't understand. What are you doing? And you talk about this a lot, right? People don't want the money actually itself, though. They want what it buys them, or they want the time. What are you doing to manage your time? Bitcoin does give you more time. So, you have the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund. How do you manage time, but also, the fund, kind of wrapping a bunch of these things together? What are you seeing in terms of putting your labor to work, putting that energy, that creativity together in the companies and the things that you're seeing? So managing time, but also what are you seeing when you're going and talking to companies, and some of the things that you're looking for when you're going to invest in them?
I mean, those are two big topics that are vastly different. I'd love to get into the time management piece, but
let's do it.
Maybe what I could do is throw out just like a little tip on this. And it's a story, it's a parable. And I'll say 2 things. So first off, I educate and coach. I run like mastermind events where we bring in like high level entrepreneurs, and we run like 1.5-day workshops, and we do coaching. And the question I get, I don't know, 3,000 to 5,000 comments a week across all my social media platforms. So I get a lot of feedback on these types of things. And people are always asking like, what should I do? Like, should I buy an apartment complex? Should I buy a single family home? Should I invest in my business? Should I buy a business? Should I sell a business? Should I move to Texas? Should I move to Mexico? Should I like whatever, right? And there's all these questions, and a lot of times there's a lot of like analysis paralysis around those. And I would just say categorically, from a big answer statement to that, the reason why most people are not clear on what they should be doing is because they're not clear on what they want to achieve. So in the old kids Disney, when Disney used to be decent, Alice in Wonderland movie, there's a scene where Alice is going through the Wonderland and she talks to the Cheshire Cat. She says, "Excuse me, could you tell me which way to go?" And he said, "Well, it depends. Where are you trying to go?" And she's like, "Well, I don't know." And he's like, "Well, then any path will do." Right. And because people haven't clearly defined what it is that they want, that building the world they want, because they haven't clearly defined what it is that they want, then any road will do. Any decision that you want will work because you don't know where you're going. Right. And so I think number one, back to time management, where they should be putting their time, where they should be investing, is to figure out what the heck is it they want. And my advice to you to try to figure that out, because it's a very big question. And most, Henry Ford said that thinking is such hard work. That's why so few people do it. But it really is. Thinking is very hard work. And especially when our frame is too broad. So let me just bring this frame down for you. I believe that everything that we've learned is wrong. I say that in my videos. And really the way that we've been learned to think about this is wrong. So when we were kids, it was like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And that was like a very narrow question. A policeman, a doctor, a fireman, or whatever, right? But really the question isn't, what do I want to do? The question is, what, in my opinion, the question that I ask is, what do I want my life to look like? What is my ideal lifestyle? Meaning, what does my perfect day look like, or my perfect week look like? Would I work out? Would I do things for my health? Would I have family and friends? Would I be doing relationships? Would I take vacations? Would I be working on meaningful work? Would I be helping others? Would I disappear on a beach in a hammock? Like, what does that look like for you? And it's different for everybody. So that's the Alice in Wonderland. Where am I going? What does my ideal life look like? Not what do I do for work? Not how much money do I have? What does my lifestyle look like? That's number one, I think. Then I reverse engineer to that. Let me give you a practical example for this. In about January of this year, I had set this goal that by my birthday in August, I wanted to be in the best shape of my life. Now, that's a broad goal. Goals have to be very specific. So for me, it was, I'm 5'10". So for me, it was like, I want to be 185 pounds at 10% body fat. That was like, I needed a date by my birthday, and I needed a goal, 185 pounds and 10% body fat. Okay. So once I had that, here we are in, January, February, March, and we're going through this. It dictated what I should eat for lunch today. I didn't have to go, well, should I eat this or should I eat that? I already knew what I should be eating. I didn't go, well, I don't know. What should I do for workouts? I already knew what I should be doing for workouts because I had a very specific goal set. Then in April, I went on a heliboarding trip to Alaska, which was just insane. And I broke my wrist. And then I couldn't lift weights. I couldn't lift weights for 3 months. And even when I started again, it was pretty weak. And then when I wasn't working out, and then my diet started slipping. And then, so now it was like April, May, June, whatever. Now it's like June or July, and I'm trying to get to my goal in August. I'm way behind on my goal. And so then I got extremely focused, and I went just straight carnivore, no carbs, just straight worked out, and I got to my goal. The point of the story is, because I had a very specific goal by a specific time, all my decisions were made for me in advance. And so that's the power of it, identifying exactly what your ideal life to look like. Then all those decisions are made in advance. And so back to building the world that you want. What does that world look like? Does that look like a world where your kids have to worry about censorship? Okay, then maybe you should be doing things right now to fight censorship, or invest into technologies that are censorship resistant or dissident technologies, right? Maybe I should be trying to build on Nostr. Maybe I should be trying to build on layer 2, layer 3 Bitcoin applications, right? And so identifying what that world is that you want, it helps identify what those things are, which anyway, I'll pause there and then we can talk about the Bitcoin fund. But yeah, these are really big answers to your questions.
No, they're phenomenal. I mean, and I couldn't agree more too. I think everything we learned is wrong. And one quick thing before we go to the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, how do you talk to people? Again, the normies is right. That's the Bitcoin way to say it, right? We're all normies to a degree. But how do you talk to people? I mean, Scott Adams, it's like you can contrast or embrace and amplify, like there's all these ways. I mean, when you're talking to people that you kind of realize like, man, this person lives on a different planet than I do. I mean, how is it that you are talking? Because the point of education in a way, it's like, great. Like you and I, like I've watched your videos for years, right? It's like me watching one of the videos. I might take a little nugget or two, but like someone else that watches it who's never seen you in their life, they're going to be like, what the heck is going on? When you run into people like that, like what is your goal, or how are you handling stuff like that when you run into that?
Yeah. This is a great question. And I have a whole Twitter thread that's sort of like framed up, and I haven't dropped it yet on this specific subject. And the way that I think about this is what you would learn in sales training. And I think most people should learn how to do sales because you learn people skills, communication skills. I've never formally had a sales job, but I've owned multiple businesses that were sales companies. So I've done a lot of sales training. And probably one of my favorite books on this is Brian Tracy wrote a book called The Psychology of Sales. And so you have to understand there's like a psychological process that someone has to go through. There's boxes that have to be checked before they can make a decision. And so this is how I would go about talking to normies, if you will. For all those people that want to go orange pill people, how do we orange pill people? That's sort of the question, right? And I would say there is no one size fits all. So what we would say in sales, what every new salesperson does, I call this mistake spilling your candy in the lobby, is they're going to go up to a new customer. They're going to sell them a pool, or they're going to sell them a new solar system or a life insurance, whatever the product is, right? And what the new salesperson would do is they'd go, hey, Brandon, my product is so cool. It's going to do this, and it's going to do this, and it's going to do this. And my product can also do this and this and this. My product also can do this. And my company has done it. It's been around this long. And my company did it. And I'm going to just dump it all on you. That's what every new person does. And that's what the Bitcoiners do. But don't you know about Bitcoin? It's decentralized and it's censorship resistant and it's immutable. It's only 21 million and the government's printing money and there's debasement and blah, 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 blah. Right. Another term that I hear it used in the sales training world is vomiting all over the customer. It's a little bit more of a graphic definition, but you get it. It makes sense. Right. But the problem is that we have to understand the psychology of sales, right? So human nature, if we understand human nature, we understand that humans are very selfish. So whenever I'm listening, I'm always listening for what's in it for me. And as humans, we're motivated only by two things. We're motivated by two things. One, pleasure and pain. I want to do things that bring me more pleasure, and I want to move away from things that bring me pain. The carrot and the stick, right? Greed and fear. So understanding those two things, what we want to do as salespeople, and back to your question of how do we orange pill people or talk to normies, is we approach it like a salesperson. I would. And that would be sort of like a game of 21. The game of 21 is where I can ask you up to 21 questions to figure out what you're thinking in your head. So I would ask you a series of questions to find out what is your single biggest problem that you're facing or biggest fear that you're dealing with. How big is it to you? How much does it impact you? And what would it mean for you to solve that one thing? Then once I know the answer to that, I go match my one product or benefit to show you how it can solve your one biggest problem and pain point. So if your single biggest problem is you're working harder and harder and harder, but you can't get ahead because things are getting expensive faster than your rate of pay is going up, then I can dig into that. And I can say, well, if you put everything onto a Bitcoin standard, things would actually be getting cheaper, for example, right? And so the goal is for me to ask questions, find out what do you care about? Well, I lived in El Salvador, and when I had to do money remittances, I had to ride 2 hours on a train or a bus every time to go to the city and get the money, and they took 30% of my fee, and then I had to worry about getting robbed. And I'd say, okay, well, what if I could send you money instantly and for free, and you never had to go anywhere? And so now all of a sudden I've matched my one product with your one concern, because people only care about themselves. And I think if people would approach it that way and stop spilling their candy in the lobby, and really talking about the benefits and not the features of the product and how it solves that, then we can start making some serious progress on that.
Love that. So the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, I would love for you to touch on that here and what you guys are doing there. Like I said, it's, what are you looking for? I mean, is it obviously the Sailor stuff and, the Bitcoin Treasury is such a big thing now, Metaplana, Similar Scientific, there's a bunch of these companies. I know Will Reeves, a Fold, a bunch of them talking about Bitcoin Treasury. Is that something you guys are I guess explain what it is, Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, and what you guys are looking for, I guess the mission of it.
Yeah, so I have two companies that I can talk about right now, and they're both in the Bitcoin space. They're both a little bit different. So the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund is a VC fund, right? And so we're actively deploying capital to build the world that we want. I'm partners in that fund with James Lavish, Larry Lepard, Greg Foss, and David Foley. And so it's a venture capital hedge fund. And basically we have investors that bring in money, and then we're deploying that into businesses that are building on and around the Bitcoin ecosystem. So this is everything from Bitcoin mining companies to Bitcoin power grid companies to Bitcoin security protocols or security keys, Bitcoin insurance products. People that are bringing the Bitcoin ecosystem to life, we invest in those companies. I think about it like this. Bitcoin is a commodity. It's an asset, similar to gold or oil as a commodity or an asset. Now, the price of oil has been, for the last 50 years, has been relatively around $60 a barrel. I guess this 80, 90 gets down to 40, 50, but it's about 60, $70 a barrel. So you could certainly buy oil, the commodity. You can buy oil futures on the commodity, oil ETFs, or there's an oil industry. That's the 8th largest industry in the world. It's worth about $4.6 trillion. Like, who designed the new drill bit so the head can go horizontally for miles now? And who designed the new pressure transfer system to move oil through the pipeline? And right? So there's an oil industry around oil, the asset. Gold, similar, same thing, right? Who designed the new sonar for the ship to sell to the Straits of Hormuz or whatever? And so Bitcoin is the same way, where Bitcoin is a commodity, Bitcoin is an asset, but there's an entire Bitcoin industry being built around it. And just like oil has hovered around, $40 to $80, meanwhile, the industry is becoming worth trillions. Bitcoin obviously is doing amazing as the asset, but the industry offers way more alpha, meaning way more growth potential in the industry. And when you think about it in gold industry, oil industry, you start to get the idea. And so that's what the Bitcoin Opportunity Fund does. The first fund, we're a closed fund, so we raised money, we closed it. We have a new fund that's opening sometime in December. And so if you want to chuck a couple shekels in to build the world that you want, that's what I would say to do. And we're seeing these projects come to life. I have another company that I don't know when this will air, but it's going public mid-November. Maybe by the time you hear this, we'll have gone public in Toronto Stock Exchange, and the company is called Matador. And we are a sister company to Metaplanet, which you just mentioned, meaning our largest investor is the lead investor on both projects. And we're doing a very similar thing. They're doing it in Japan. We're doing it in North America. And we're building a publicly traded vehicle to hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet and deploy that MicroStrategy playbook. And then we'll be deploying that Bitcoin as well as doing mergers and acquisitions and playing in the layer 2, layer 3 space, which is where we think most of the growth will be. I believe that there's a massive need for institutional capital to allocate towards publicly exposed Bitcoin opportunities. There's not very many of them. And there's not really a good one for like playing in the layer 2, layer 3 space, which is where I believe all the growth will come. And so Matador is deploying capital there. Two very different things. Bitcoin Opportunity Fund is a closed fund. We're not holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet. We do use Bitcoin as the unit of account. So the goal of the BOF is to return on top of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is our unit of account. So we have to beat Bitcoin. But it's a VC fund. We're investing into projects that we think in 5 years are going to be massive, and hopefully we get some big home runs out of that. Whereas Matador is a different company and specifically running more of a MicroStrategy playbook, Bitcoin on the balance sheet, that type of thing.
Love that. A couple more quick ones as we're wrapping here. I want to be cognizant of your time. What how do you look at your legacy wealth? I know this is something you touch on a lot. When you've been talking about lately a lot, just your kind of future planning, estate planning, the kids, et cetera. Bitcoin, obviously, I know a lot of people would say, well, Bitcoin's outside of that. I don't need a will and trust. I've got my seed phrase. How do you see that, again, when you're kind of delineating those things and thinking about those things in the future, decades from now, and it's hard to think about those things, but we have to. What are you doing? Not exactly, obviously, but how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think, when you think about wealth, I mean, you talk a lot, there's a lot of talk about to build wealth, it's concentration, to keep wealth, it's diversification. I think anybody who's like, I don't need that, I have Bitcoin. I mean, sure, that's cool when you got $5,000. When you got 5 million or 10 million or 50 million, it's a different story. And so I think there's a lot of nuance that's missed in that conversation. Sure, you got $5,000. I mean, hopefully your kids know how to work your hardware wallet, and like, cool, whatever, right? But as you get more money, you're going to diversify. The other thing is, like I said, is that at the end of the day, you have to realize that we don't want money, as I already made the case for, right? What we want is goods and services. What we want is experiences, right? You've often probably heard the story, and or just whatever the saying that most millionaires or most billionaires on their deathbed would probably give all their money back to get one more good experience with their loved ones, right? So that's ultimately what we want. So, for example, I'm literally like moving furniture in right now into this beach house I've been building down in Mexico. It's been going on. We broke ground about a year and a half ago. It's been like a 4-year project. And in Mexico, you don't have loans. It's a cash deal. I put a lot of cash into this place, right? And a lot of Bitcoiners that I've talked to are like, that's like ridiculous. Like, if you should just put all that into Bitcoin. Look how much more that would be worth today. Like, the price of that home in Mexico has gone up a lot. It's beachfront. It's done really, really well. It's probably tripled or quadrupled. But if I would have put it into Bitcoin, it could be up 10x. But for what? So one day I could buy a beach house, right? I could have more money, so one day I could get the thing that I just got right now. I want the thing I want right now because I have kids, and I want my kids to go there, because the experience that I'm going to have with my kids at that house today is worth more than all the money that Bitcoin could ever be worth in the future to me. So that's the way I think about it. And so then I have multiple assets because I want experiences. So I want the beach house. I have a ranch property in Texas that we go to, and we have animals there, and we do events there and things like that. And we have these different assets that are worth things. And so then how do I protect and preserve that for the future then? So again, if you have $5,000, put it in a cold storage, and like, hopefully your kids know how to work your hardware wallet. But as you get more money, you have to think about things differently. And so, so then how do we pass that down? We've been seeing in the UK this week, they're passing these new inheritance tax laws on farmland. And we have that in the United States as well, which basically is a Marxist rule. So in the 10 points of communism, one of them is to, basically stop inheritance, right? Yeah. And so, that's a Marxist law. And you don't have to be subject to that. So, for example, I can move all my assets into an irrevocable trust, and those assets are not owned by me anymore. And so really the role of what rich people do is they own nothing, sort of what the WEF wants us to do, own nothing and be happy. So rich people own nothing. They control a lot of things. They own nothing. So those assets are now owned by a trust. I don't own those anymore. Sue me. I own nothing. But this trust does. Now, I have access to those assets in the trust. And so then those assets live in the trust, and my kids can have the trust, and on and on. So there are ways to do this. I don't know about the UK law specifically, but in the US, we have rules to do that. So that's how we think about that. How do we get the assets? That's problem number one. But then problem number two is that how do we keep the assets? And which is much harder than actually problem number one. And so we use this through tax efficiency, entities, asset protection, trust, corporations, things like that. And then ultimately, the last piece I'd throw in is that then, we set these up in these trusts so that these assets can pass down from generation to generation. And a lot of people in the Bitcoin community today are like, I'm not passing any assets down to my kids. It's going to ruin them. It's going to make them lazy. It's going to whatever. You'd rather have your farmland go to Bill Gates? Okay. Not me. I'd rather keep my assets away from those people as much as I can. But ultimately, like, why wouldn't you want to give that hand up to those future generations that we have, right? I think the fiat monetary system has trained us to be in a debt-based monetary system. And a debt-based monetary system is a system that it steals value from the future, right? I'm taking money today that I have to pay back from future production. And I think as Bitcoiners, we should think about pushing value to the future, not stealing value from the future. And so I would think about it as my life, the work that I put into place today, the assets that I build, whether it's the books I write, the courses I produce, the lives I touch, but also the assets I accumulate, is my proof of work. That's my proof of work of my life. And my life is one block. And I hope that my kids and everyone else below me is the next block on the chain, and the next block and the next block. And hopefully over a long period of time, we build up, my Moss family legacy builds up a blockchain of life that is pushing value into the future, making it easier for each generation to succeed, as opposed to a debt-based monetary system that continues to steal value from the future and puts everyone at a deficit. And I think that's the way that Bitcoiners should think about this. I mean, we should have a low time preference, right? We should be thinking about the future. So why wouldn't we think about that for the future? And then the next question is, well, then, but that's going to make everyone lazy. And then we can talk about we use something called a family constitution. And so every person in the future that would get access to the trust has to abide by the rules and the laws of that constitution, similar to how we have one in the United States. So there's lots of ways around that, but that's sort of how I think about that legacy wealth. And really it's just the overall mindset I have of how I think if we don't want to operate in the fiat world, then we shouldn't have a fiat mindset towards the future and future wealth either.
I love you said that the Constitution is one thing I was going to have you bring up if you didn't mention that. So I love that. And that's, again, Bitcoiners too. I mean, if you're holding and you're either have wealth or you're gaining wealth here as the years go on, that's something you really need to think about. And I love the push the wealth into the future instead of, pulling wealth out of the future. I absolutely love that. Last one here before we wrap, little prognostication, again, a little mind reading in a way, but what do you think, so kind of summing all this up together in a way, the economic sonic boom, I don't know if it was Naval Ravikant or someone just tweeted that out in the last day or two, or a couple of people, but and you've talked about this a lot too, with growing our way out of, with GDP, these economic, the waves, the Q waves, all these different huge cycles coming together, because we have to print. I mean, you can't pay debt off because the system will collapse. It's a debt-based system. So you have to grow your way out of it some way or another, whether it's, the Bitcoin. I guess the question to you is, do you think, what are your Bitcoin, what's your Bitcoin prognostication in the sense of, do you think capital gains will be removed? Do you think we'll be able to 1031? Like what do you see from everything you've seen and heard and people you've talked to? How do you see this kind of playing out? And will this, and then that coupled with tax cuts, whatever, is it going to be a growth, GDP rising that's going to help us really get out of what we're in and in this melt up, I guess? So how do you kind of see this playing out?
Well, I mean, that's a really big question. Try to bring a little bit of shape to that. Let's talk in time frames. So what do I think happens over the next 5 years and maybe over the next 10 years? Maybe we can kind of look at that. I would say, no, I don't think, in regards to the debt situation that we have, I don't think there's any answer for that. There's no short-term answer for that. And there's probably no long-term answer for that. Ray Dalio frames it up. There's a lot that Ray Dalio has done that I think is brilliant. And one of it is he talks about there's only 4 ways out of debt when we get to this level. And that's default. And again, as I showed, there's no historical precedent for that. That's not going to happen. You could tax your way out of it, but that's just not going to work. There's not enough money to be taxed. You can grow your way out of it, or you can just inflate your way out of it. And so really, it's probably a combination of a couple of those. So there's no way out of the debt situation. And whether it was Trump or Kamala, I mean, the debt situation was not going to be solved. There's just really no way to bring the government back to a budget without crashing everything. You just can't do that. So I think ultimately, this is probably going to continue to muddle along. I think Trump will probably increase the budget more than any president before him, just like every other president before him has done more than the president before him. So I think, we'll continue to see the debt go up. I expect inflation to continue to go up, partly one because of the massive amount of debt that we'll continue to bring on, the fiscal spending, et cetera, the fiscal dominance, but also in addition, because of the decentralization that's happening. So as the world continues to break apart, and I think there's less and less cooperation, then supply chains will be impacted. There's a lot of onshoring and reshoring to make America great again. Even Biden was trying to do that as well with the CHIPS Act and things like that. And so as we start to re-onshore and nearshore things, that's going to push the prices of things up. So I think the future is highly inflationary for both of those two reasons, and they're not tied to each other. But I do think that we could be on the precipice. I'm optimistically hopeful of this, that we're on the precipice of a new renaissance. We saw Vivek Ramaswamy. I had him on my channel talking to him, and he thought we could grow our way out of this debt. So we have the debt problem, and the debt problem is not going to be solved. But what we really have is the debt to GDP ratio. And so the debt to GDP is two things. It's debt and GDP. So we could still theoretically have the debt going up, but GDP growing faster. to bring the ratio from 120 down to 100, down to 90, down to 80, and bringing it back down to a more manageable level. Vivek Ramaswamy said that he thought we could do that if we would unleash the American economy, if we'd peel back all the regulations, take the boot off the neck of entrepreneurs and business people, we could have this economic boom. And at a time when, Luke Grumman always talks about, unless we have some efficiency miracle, so we have AI coming onto the scene, and then we need an energy miracle. And Trump says, drill, baby, drill. Like he wants to unleash the energy in the U.S. and not just gas and oil. We really need nuclear. China has 150 nuclear reactors under construction right now today. The U.S. can't get one. But hopefully we can change that. We can unleash the energy. We have the technology. We peel back the regulations. We unleash the American economy. I'm super bullish on what's going to happen in America, but I'm also bullish on inflation. And those are two different things. Things can be good and bad at the same time. You have to understand this. There's a lot of nuance in this thinking. Things can be good and bad at the same time. So inflation is very bad. It steals wealth, period. It steals productivity, period. It steals hours from my life, period. That's it. It's extremely harmful to the poor people. But at the same time, the governments want inflation because they inflate away their debt. Well, the good news is they inflate away my debt as well. So I could use inflation to my advantage. I don't want it. I want to end it. But while it's here, I can use it to my advantage. And so while inflation is certainly a bad thing, it's also a good thing. And that's why I said they can be good and bad at the same time. So inflation pushes the prices of all my assets up. Inflation inflates away the debt that I can take on, and we're in a debt-based monetary system, so I can use that to my advantage. And so I think we're in a highly inflationary environment. I think the American economy is going to go through a renaissance. And then back to sort of Bitcoin and technology, I talk about, you mentioned the Q wave or this quantum leap wave I talk about. So about every 50 years, the world goes through this quantum leap of technology that's happened for the last 300 years since the Industrial Revolution. And really, when you look back at this, the last one started in 1971, which was microprocessors, personal computers, telecommunications. And each one of those for that 50-year period was really the only place to invest. So if you had invested into Intel and Apple and Microsoft, in the last 50 years, you crushed it. You crushed it. NVIDIA, Google, you crushed it. The only place to invest 50 years before that was Ford and GM and GE. And before that, it was only in oil and steel companies. And so today we're entering this next one, the sixth wave, as I call it. And it's not just one technology. It's a cluster of technologies, how they work together. And so really we have, as I already spit some of them out, but we have Bitcoin, we have AI, we have decentralization overall, robotics, and all of that coming together is going to create this massive wave of flourishment. So you take the American economy, hopefully, like I said, optimistically hopeful of getting regulations pulled back, unleashing that, bringing a lot of cheap power to the place, having technologists and futurists like Vivek and Elon in place at the time when the sixth revolution is happening. I'm extremely bullish for the future. And I think asset prices, specifically in that niche, the intersection of those at play, are going to see prices that most people just can't even put their head around. I think it's an enormous opportunity. It's an enormous opportunity that will only come really once in our lifetime. The next time this happens in 50 years from now, I won't be thinking about investing anymore if I'm even still alive at that point. And so now is the time. And I think it's going to be wildly bullish, exceeding, I should say, everybody's expectations. So yeah, I'm all in on that.
Yeah, I could not agree more, Mark. It's a beautiful way to wrap. Any last thoughts and anything you want to shill? Where can people find you at?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I mean, one, just go to my website, onemarkmoss.com, and all my social media handles and YouTube. I make a couple videos a week on YouTube. I have a free book on there. It's called How to Retire Tax-Free Off of Bitcoin. So you can get that for free. There's a calculator that goes with it. It shows you how to run the strategy. It's probably worthwhile if you're a Bitcoiner to go pick that up. So you don't give your Bitcoin to BlackRock. Keep it for yourself and your family, and just leverage the cash flow that you need. And the last thing I'd say is just, again, I just really want to motivate people because the world is changed by the doers. We, as people, are meant to be creators, not consumers. The globalists want to turn us into consumers, but we are meant to be creators, and we should be creating the world that we want. And if you can't articulately think and vision what you want your world to look like and then go actively build that world, you're just not going to have it. So not just the don't vote, don't bitch kind of a thing. Don't build the world you want, don't bitch. But I think I just would motivate people. The change happens from the bottom up. It happens from each one of us first having responsibility for ourselves, responsibility for our future, building that future that we want, and then influencing people, not forcing or coercing people, but influencing people by being the best versions of ourselves, learning new skills, providing those skills to the world, bringing value to the world, deploying our capital to build that world. And I think we can turn this thing around pretty quickly.
Well, it's an honor to have you, Mark. This message needs to be heard far and wide. Thank you for being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
All right, Brandon, thanks so much.
If you like that interview, then you're going to love the one that we just did with Joe Burnett, where we talk about Bitcoin being bearish at $5 million per coin. Go check that out here. Or you might want to check out the one with macro legend Tom Luongo, where he talks about the short squeeze that's going to send Bitcoin to the moon and how that's going to happen. Go check that out here. You're going to love it. Come on, see you in there.